Ukraine keeps pounding Russian oil refineries while more details become known about the Russian incursion into NATO airspace yesterday. But we'll talk about this as well as about anything else that has happened along the front lines and behind them in this sitrep about the war in Ukraine. The reports right now are from the Estonian side. This shows the flight path, and in total, the incursion was less than 10 kilometers. Basically, the Russians did leave the designated flight path between Estonia and Finland and crossed into Estonia and just kept going straight. They ignored any attempts to interact with them. They had their transponder off. They did not file a flight plan, and they didn't even react to the NATO interceptors that were started against them. The likely effect there is also that these MiG-31 did actually not carry Kinzhal air-launched ballistic missiles, as was initially reported, as we have the Swedish Air Force posting that they intercepted 3 MiG-31 the same day. So it's extremely likely we're talking about the same planes, especially as those planes were flying in the direction of Sweden. We see them only carrying 3 air-to-air missiles, and those look like the R-73 short-range air-to-air missiles. In total, this was a clear provocation to test NATO in several areas. The lack of a reaction towards this is speaking for it. The fact that the Russians did not interact with the interceptors, did not interact with the radios, and 3 manned aircraft will not lose their bearing and by coincidence, by accident, fly into NATO airspace. This was intended clearly. There can be no doubt about this. This also means that shoot down could have been justified in this context, but at the current scenario, we should not neglect the possibility that Russia is actually counting with NATO at some point, potentially shooting down some of their planes. If this is happening, if Russian planes are shot down by NATO, Russia will claim that it was not in NATO airspace, but in international airspace, obviously. And this will then allow the Kremlin to say NATO just killed Russian soldiers. Look, we fight against NATO. They will be able to use that for their domestic and their international audience and can use that for mobilization against Ukraine. Mobilization means also the public, financial means, etc. But theoretically, at least, it would allow them to call up more reservists as well if the need is seen from the Russian side. Russia so far is also still declining that they have responsibility for the drones that entered Poland. This is normal Russian behavior that we've seen in the past again and again. They decline any responsibility for even open facts that are visible to everyone. This allows them flexibility in regards to their domestic audience and allows those who want to believe Russia by all means to accept something that Russia has served them that they can believe. The other important fact with this here is that from the US president, there's nothing. The reaction from the US president is not in any significant dimension. And at the same time, the US are continuing to cut off military aid for the Baltics and for Poland. This while Russia is actively testing the Baltics and Poland with military means. This obviously is part of the messaging towards the Kremlin that is coming now from Washington. Where is the deterrence that is supported by the United States? We can't really see it anymore. The Ukrainians strike the Russians. Logistics in Kursk were hit. The Ukrainians also hit the Volgograd refinery, the Bashkortostan refinery, the Saratov refinery, and the Samara refinery. They also hit an oil and gas facility in Krasnodar Krai. This shows recent attacks in the past 45 days by the Ukrainians against oil refineries, and the past 4 refineries that I mentioned were just in the last 3 days. So Ukraine keeps pounding the refineries with increasing successes, and that obviously has already led to fuel shortages for the public inside of Russia that is currently spreading in Russia. So more and more oblasts now have fuel shortages. Let's switch over to the developments along the front line, and here we start off with Sumy. The 30th Rifle Regiment, according to mill bloggers, is replacing parts of the 810th Naval Infantry Brigade. This is the last Naval Infantry Brigade in Sumy Kursk region that was still stationed there. This should probably allow us to assume that the 810th Naval Infantry Brigade is also going to be redeployed, probably either to Zaporizhzhia or the Donbas as well, and that should more or less confirm that serious Russian attempts to advance further into the direction of Sumy city will probably no longer be expected anytime soon. We switch to the Kharkiv region, and here we have the Russians crossing reports by the Ukrainians that Russians try to swim through naval obstacles and then gain positions inside of forested areas. We see here that there are several rivers, obviously, where the bridges are in most cases destroyed. This also needs to say that during colder weather, this will no longer be possible. Right now, the soldiers might be fine swimming through a river and then drying off in the sun, but once the temperatures go lower, that won't work anymore, and motorcycles will also cause problems with the muddy weather and then snow. This will diminish the Russian abilities to continue using their tactics that they've used so far. Then we are switching to the Eastern Front, and here we have reports from the Ukrainians inside of Kupiansk. The Russians are, according to the Ukrainians, only advancing with infiltration tactics. They are advancing through they have entered Kupiansk, according to the Ukrainians, by using the gas pipelines that we talked about in the past. The Ukrainians try to destroy them and flood them to a degree, but obviously, even to the according to the Ukrainians, the Russians are still inside of Kupiansk and are currently being engaged there. Then we have a Russian advance in the town of Chandryhulove. Here we have, this is down here in the area of west of Terni. So when we go here, Chandryhulove is here. The interesting part here is that the geolocation shows a Russian soldier in civilian clothing being killed. He's advancing together with a Russian soldier in military gear. So we have a visual confirmation once again of the Russians trying to hide their identity. And as said in the past, if this is being used to actively engage the Ukrainians, and as Chandryhulove is not under Russian control yet, this is likely meaning that the Ukrainians are engaging that the Russians are engaging Ukrainians while wearing civilian clothing. That would be perfidy and thus a war crime. The Russians have also taken control over vast areas of the northern bank of the Seversky Donetsk. We have that here. This was to be expected, especially with the Ukrainians losing positions inside of the Serebryansk forest, them being squeezed in between the Russian positions in the north and the river in the south was obviously not sustainable. There must have been a significant withdrawal from the Ukrainians. We have 3 positions that are geolocated west of Serebryanka, and we already see that the deep state map more or less is indicating them that these areas here, the northern bank, is now likely under Russian control. The deep state map doesn't color it under Russian control yet, but the likelihood of Ukrainians still operating there is close to 0. So it's probably correct to simply turn it red to hand it over to acknowledge a Russian control of this area. That was it north of the Seversky Donetsk. In the Seversk direction itself, I do not have any changes that I can confirm. In the Kostiantynivka direction, we have the Russians advancing in Shevchenko and Chasiv Yar. We have that here. At this point, Russian soldiers were engaged by the Ukrainians, indicating that they continue operating inside of Shevchenko. That does not prove that they've consolidated control there. There are infiltrations happening here as well, but probably bigger parts of Shevchenko should be considered contested as of now. The Russians have also advanced in the direction of Predtechune. Here, they have been spotted at this point here. We have that geolocated Here, where the Russians are pushing forward and are obviously eliminating this line here, especially with them already operating, at least with infiltration groups in the southeastern part of Kostiantynivka in the Dachas here. This shows us that the Russians are continuing their progress towards pushing the Ukrainians away. In Oleksandro Shultyne, directly south of it, the Russians have also been spotted here along the tree lines, along the railway line. This is more or less at this point here inside the contested area according to the deep state map, and we now have a visual confirmation of this. That was it, what I can confirm in changes in this direction. We have the deep state map recently updating the area towards the south of Katerinivka to be under Russian control. This is obviously then being considered to be a fact, as the pro-Ukrainian deep state map is attributing territory to the Russians. Thus, we assume that this is correct. In the Pokrovsk direction, Syrsky, the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces, has reported to the Ukrainian President Zelensky that 180 square kilometers and 7 villages were liberated in the rough Dobropilya direction, so in this direction here. We have Colonel Monk, who is a local commander there, saying that the Russians in Kucharev Yar are cut off for 3 weeks now already. A fresh confirmation by the Ukrainians that a pocket actually exists here, an encirclement up here. Obviously, the Russians will be able to resupply them with drones, and that's what's likely happening here. We also have pictures, evidence from fighting inside of Pokrovsk itself. We have the Russians engaging 2 Ukrainian soldiers on foot that are walking around in the western part of Pokrovsk. The video indicates that this was likely an infiltration group. The behavior of both sides would not indicate the Ukrainians expecting the Russians there. At least that's what I read from this. So whether or not the western part of Pokrovsk is to be considered a gray zone or not can be argued, but at least that is not a confirmation of consolidated control. It's a little different at another geolocation inside of Pokrovsk here. Here, Ukrainians attacked Russian positions inside of this. This should be more or less here. So that would be an indication of Russian, at least temporary presence in this area that is known to the Ukrainians, and thus fresh geolocations of the Russians operating in the southern part of Pokrovsk. Whether or not they've consolidated is obviously still an open question. The situation around Pokrovsk, according to the Ukrainians, is difficult. The drone threat is so high that the Ukrainians can't use any vehicles without their own electronic warfare closer to the front line. Rubicon is especially dangerous because of their fiber optic drones, and they are also using sleeper drones. Basically, fiber optic drones are flown to supply routes and then landed, and as the fiber optic drones barely use any electricity as they transfer the video through the cable and don't have to radio it, they can stay in these sleeping positions for a significantly longer time than regular radio controlled FPV drones, and thus simply wait for a resupply run and then attack it. And that is tactics that the Russians use in this direction. In the Mishova direction here, we have the Russians inside of Muravka, actually on the western bank of Muravka, on the western edge. So Muravka is probably under Russian control by now. At least that's what we can see from the geolocations. The Russians have also advanced in the direction of Pokrovsk. This is here. We have them inside of Beresove. Numerous geolocations show them in the basically all over Beresove. We have them here, 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 and here. This would indicate that Beresove is likely in Russian control by now as well. The same is further south from Novoivanovka here. This is also showing the Russians at the southern part of it, indicating a further advance by the Russians. Whether or not they already control the town or not cannot be confirmed from my side. We switch to the direction of Zaporizhzhia. Here we have further geolocations of Russian advances in Primorsk, in the southern part of Primorsk. We have that here. The Russians were first observed at this point, and then they were observed further to the north. This is Primorske, which is significantly further north, but as we can see, it continues until that road, and Stepanohirsk is to the east of it. We have seen the Russians operating roughly in that area before, but now they are clearly back at this point. Again, usually not necessarily a confirmation of consolidated control, but probably the gray zone should be expanded towards the north. According to the Ukrainians, they are now building drone tunnels 15 to 20 kilometers behind the front lines because of the threat of FPVs in this area as well. They are mentioning here that a lot of civilians have been attacked as well, but we have to acknowledge at the same time that both Ukrainians as well as Russians use civilian vehicles for logistics right up to the front line. So at least some of those attacks can probably be understood as a mistake, that as both sides are using civilian vehicles. In the overall situation, Putin said that by now 700,000 Russian soldiers, more than 700 Russian soldiers, are on the front line in Ukraine, but Ukraine claims that 300,000 Russian soldiers have already fallen and wounded in 2025 alone, so the number of Russian losses is still staggering. The Russian Chief of the General Staff, Gerasimov, was now confirmed by Putin for another 5 years in office, despite him already being 70. So clearly, for whatever reason, he still has Putin's trust, despite all the setbacks in the war in Ukraine. Putin is standing by him and is going to continue leaving him in his post. In partisan area and sabotage, we have news. The Lithuanian government enforcement agencies have arrested 3 individuals. 2 of them are Russian citizens with connections to the intelligence agencies, and they are being accused of having sent 4 incendiary devices in July 2024. 3 of them exploded, 1 at the airport in Leipzig in Germany, 1 in a truck in Poland, and 1 in a DHL warehouse in Birmingham in Great Britain. The 4th one did not blow up because of a mistake. So this is now, arrests have been made, and according to the Lithuanians, direct connections to the Russian government and security agencies. And quite fresh in a cyber attack on the aircraft, on the booking software. So there are reports that at various airports inside of Europe, the booking for flights has to be done on pen and paper, as the software has failed after a cyber attack. The reason, the origin of that cyber attack is so far as I see, unknown, but it clearly can be guessed where it's coming from. The Russian government is also reporting that the deputy chief of staff of the Kremlin, Dmitry Kozak, has resigned. He was supposedly the only one who was opposing the invasion of Ukraine in the National Security Council on the 21st of February, when the rest signed off on it. And according to media reports, he was trying to set up a deal with Ukraine, according to which the NATO membership would have been ended, and that would have been it. But Putin declined because he wanted to annex territory. At least that's what was reported at that time by Reuters. And now there are also reports that in the past month, he has recommended Putin to end the war and to basically give up trying to catch more, to negotiate a peaceful to negotiate an end to the war itself, and that seemingly has cost him his job, indicating once again that the Russian government intends to continue this war, that even people with direct access to Putin, people that were allowed to have dissenting voices in the past, people that had the trust from Putin, are now being replaced, as they are not fully behind the war effort. And one more sign, not that we need it more, that that Putin intends to fight it through to the bitter end. We obviously also have tons of government officials still saying that no peace agreement until the realities on the ground and the root causes have been fixed, etc., etc. So from the Russian side, no interest, no willingness whatsoever to give up its ambitious goals, no willingness to make a compromise. Russia continues to aim for its maximalist targets. And that's it for today's sitrep. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. It helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment if you have something to add. If you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. But that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.